Hello. Sorry about the silence there for a couple of seconds, but I was making sure everything was right in terms of the volume and making sure that nothing was going to make weird noises, which is always a potential. Now, as always, my live chat is now, well, as is new, my live chat is on my phone in front of me, so it's rushing past me at a speed, so occasionally I will stop things to go back to it. But, hello everyone. Hello, Alex. Hello, King's Rook. Hello, Jay Richardson. Hello, Jim Heaton. Hello, Bitchin. Hello, Kevin. Hello, Gary. Hello, Richard. Hello, Albert. Hello, Blue Shirt Buddha. Hello, I think I've said hello to Kevin, but I'll say it again. Hello, Daniel. Greetings from Southwest on the... Sorry, I'm only... Oh, yeah. Hello, Eamon. Hello, everyone. Right then. So what's the first things first? I have something important to do first. That is recharge my glass. It's essential, really. It is essential. And thank you to everyone who has very kindly been liking and sharing all these things. It's very nice. Currently enjoying this. It's it's a lot of fun because otherwise I'd be trapped at home just writing and not really having the fun of chatting with people. And I like the interacting part of the academia. It's why I went into being a lecturer. Hello, Jay. Hello, Gordon. Hello, John. Hello, Jim and Kevin again. Hello, Michael. So, today is Tribal Battles and Darings, the Black Powder Cruise. Now, you will have seen some of the slides before, but you will not have seen all the slides by any stretch of the imagination. So, because I've been adding some of them. Greetings. Hello, Austin. Greetings to Arizona. And please note, thank you to my girlfriend and her lovely family who have sent me 6 bottles of the old original stuff. They are very, very kind. So thank you, Louise, Anne, and Eric. Thank you all. I won't say my nickname for you on national on YouTube, girlfriend. Love you. Anyway, thank you also to my mum and sister who very kindly put up with me being quite loud last night. Apparently, even though I was trying to be quiet, I was still loud enough to keep them awake while recording some of the intros. Well, it happens. They're very nice. They put up with it. So, hello everyone. Hello family. So, Tribals, Battles, Darings, the Back Pocket Cruisers. Well, first off first. So this is going till 3 a.m. Well, theoretically, it's supposed to go no further than 8:30 because I've got Mysteries of the Deep tonight to watch. But it might well end up closer to 9 a.m. 9 p.m. I'm not sure. It does have about 40 slides loaded up. There are about 40 of them. Kevin Kingsrook, how long till you can build a boat from the empty bottles? Well, there's only just quickly move that round. There's only 14, 15, 16 there. It's nothing too excessive, he says. Right then. Bilge pumps. I would love to say I'm contractually required to do this, but I'm not contractually required to do it at all. I just love advertising bilge pumps because it's such a cool thing. And come on, Jamie produced this particular meme for the meme chat on my Discord. So there's a link to bilge pumps at the latest episode, and there's a link to the Discord down below where you can find the meme section for all this. And I love the memes that are coming out of bilge pumps. I love the discussions that are coming out from bilge pumps. I basically love all the stuff. We started it as a bit of fun, thinking we do 3 episodes and everybody going, please don't do any more. And now they've given us our own stream. It's the SimSec are entirely run by donations. They're a charity, so it's entirely sort of dependent upon donations. These things going, and people listening to it. And apparently, enough people have been listening. They've enjoyed enough that they are prepared to use some of the money donated from charity to give us our own stream. So, thank you. Right then. How many do we need to recycle until there's enough money from iron brew bottles to build our own super travel? Not sure. Someone has been working out how much they cost at the time and working out for inflation, adjusting for inflation to see how much it would cost to build one now. I don't think we'll be covering HMS Sherwood's attack on an Admiral's barge today. Probably. I listened to the 4th one this afternoon after work. Well, that's good. Right, so this is the problem that the Royal Navy faced in the 1930s. Global trade. Okay? So here's the reality. Whenever someone sits there and goes, oh, this Navy built these ships which were better than the Royal Navy's, or this, that, and the other, I sit there and go, well, what were they fighting? What were they building their ships for? The Italians were building their ships to fight in the Mediterranean. The Germans, largely the North Atlantic, maybe a bit of the South Atlantic. The Japanese, mostly the Pacific. The Americans, mainly the Pacific versus the Japanese, but also the Atlantic. The Royal Navy are building them to fight the world over. They are building it to fight the world over. The ships have to be able to fight everywhere and anywhere. The Royal Navy is having to prepare for a world war. This affects how you design ships. And when you have treaties which place absolute limits, theoretically at least, on what you can build, it affects how things are balanced within them. So, this is the sort of the scenario you're in. You're dealing with a navy which is building its forces around global trade, around global warfare, and it's in the late 1930s when you've got a lot of technological change going on, and you've also got treaties as a scenario. And yes, I would be quite honest, if I'm honest, I have to say the Royal Navy takes advantage of the treaties. They use them to their advantage, but they are still, in a way, limitations on what they can do. So they are a factor. But honestly, I never really list the treaties as much as I should when I'm talking about these ships. Because ultimately, the Royal Navy doesn't pay as much attention to them as, well, Henderson wasn't really bothered to pay attention. When it came to cruisers, he paid attention. When it came to things that were advantages, he paid attention. When it came to his destroyers and the babies, he could be surprisingly vague. Crowdfunding a tribal would be fun. It would be fun. But no, this is what the Royal Navy is looking at to defend around the world. So that's where you have to start thinking what is going on. And which one of the reasons why, by the way, when we're talking about Britain's global warfare and global scenario, when I'm talking about the Graf Spee, I often say the Graf Spee was one of the most ineffective surface raiders known to mankind. Because if you look at the trade going around in the areas where it was operating, those are not heavy trade areas. It's going for a political impact rather than an economic one. The tribals are built to secure that area. That's built to secure the Atlantic. That's where these ones would be sent if they were being used in their cruiser arm. There are lots of different theories for HMS Eskimo's bow. Crumple zone, detachable weapon. We'll get to that. We'll get to the Eskimo bow. So this is Admiral Reginald Henderson. And he's a cool guy. There is so much stuff about him I would like to say, and someday I have got to actually turn myself into a bit of an biographer and write his biography, I swear. But until that day, I have written a bit of biography of him in my book. And it goes a little something like this. In 1902, Reginald Guy Hannon Henderson was appointed sub-lieutenant and posted to Mirrodin-class destroyer HMS Siren. In 1911, at the age of 30, he married the 28-year-old Elaine Campbell and started a family together. They'd be blessed with 2 sons. In 1913, he took part in a naval mission to Greece. He did well, was made a commander and second in command of the battleship HMS Erin, sister of HMS Agincourt. They were the 2 battleships never delivered to Turkey, which he was aboard during the Battle of Jutland. After this, Henderson was posted to the Admiralty, taking part in the Battle of the Atlantic, carrying out critical analysis which made the case for the adoption of convoys, which would win that contest. After the war, after the war was over, he was posted as Chief of Staff to the commander of the China Station under Admiral Alexander Duff. There he stayed until taking up post in Greenwich Naval Academy in 1923. In 1926, he's placed in command of HMS Furious. In 1928, he becomes aide-de-camp to King George V. In 1931, he's promoted to Rear Admiral, becoming the first ever Rear Admiral aircraft carriers. Now, he becomes Rear Admiral aircraft carriers in a rather interesting way. There is a post being made for Commodore aircraft carriers being considered. Henderson is one of the officers, especially invited along because of his politics background and all these things, to the meeting. And in a story which is, I'm not able to confirm with documentations, but rather reminds me of the way Ewan Sotheby Taylor got command of the landing craft group. Apparently, Commodore was changed to Rear Admiral, and what do you know? Rear Admiral Henderson was appointed. So you first write a paper causing a meeting, then you go along to the meeting and you change the post around so you get the post. It was a good time for him. And he does so well that, in nicest way, the RN and the RAF are both deeply impressed with his work. The RAF are really upset with him because he managed to do all sorts of naughty things. He, including, as far as they're concerned, abduct a load of their officers to go off and do exercises when they were supposed to be taking part in exercises on land. 1934, he is one of the few officers who can claim he has had experience in destroyers, battleships, and cruisers, as well as aircraft carriers. When I say one of the few officers, at his rank at which he's appointed to be 3rd Sea Lord, he is the only officer who has commanded all 4. He's not only served in them, he's commanded all 4 at different times. Some of the postings, he was in charge of them. He was in charge temporarily. But I found scenarios like when he's out in the China Station, he takes command of a sloop, he takes command of a destroyer because of illnesses and officers, and all sorts of things. He jumps in where he's needed. I can't prove those all with documentation. I just find stories about him, and if it's a one-off story written by someone, it's iffy to cite it if you can't find a documentation to back it up. But I've been looking into him a lot. Oh, there's a lot of good stuff going on in the chat tonight. Water in the torpedo bulges worked as armor, but didn't count as weight of the ship. Yep, that was one of the Royal Navy's plans. That was came up with. There's a dispute as to whether that was came up with by Roger Keyes or Tyrrell. Anyway, so Henderson is part of a group at this time which are trying to prepare the Royal Navy for World War II, for the war that's coming. And there are all sorts of officers in this group, but the really key ones are Henderson and Cunningham. They are the big names pushing for it and pushing the preparation. Keyes is also involved. Chatfield is being dragged into it, and other admirals are involved as well. But these are two officers who are kind of interesting. At the beginning of World War II, they are captains. Well, Commodore in the case of the gentleman down the bottom, who's Harwood. And the gentleman at the top is Captain Brind. Now, for those who've watched the Royal Navy, my episode about my videos about the Royal Navy and it's basically good guys behaving badly, you'll have heard me talk about Captain Brind. He was the commander of HMS Birmingham at Tsingtao in 1939. He doesn't look like the sort of man to stare down an entire Japanese squadron of heavy cruisers, but he does. He looks rather a nice gentleman in that one. You don't see this sort of things. Anyway, so the philosophy they come up with is information to focus the perspiration. Image is as important as reality, and whole force over individual ships. So this means that individual ships might be individually less capable than their, let's say, Italian or German or Japanese counterpart. But the point is you have to be able to bring 2 or 3 to the fight to fight the Japanese, Italian, or Japanese single one. So this is what they're starting to think. Now, in peacetime, presence matters. Presence is how you deter conflict. Presence by showing up is how you build the relationships which allow you to gather intelligence and which allows you to shape the peace and therefore shape a war. But the critical thing is decisions are made by those who show up. The Royal Navy knows what matters isn't necessarily what you show up in, but it's that you show up. And preferably if you show up with the appropriate level of warship. That is, if everyone else is showing up with their huge battle fleets, you send a sloop or a light cruiser. Something which shows, look, we're Britain. We don't need to show up with our battle fleet because we are Britain. You have to keep, your presence up. But intelligence feeds through into war, because then it's reconnaissance. It's choosing when to fight when possible, and when possible, fighting at night. I.e., when numbers don't count, but as much as training and as much as your, not just training, but as much your combat ethos will matter. It's various scenarios, but let's be honest. If you're fighting at night at this time, remember Britain is beginning to get radar and understand radar is going through to senior officers in late 1930s. Even the Navy's starting to hear about it. But more importantly, they are already ahead of the other services in night fighting, and they realize this. They are practicing far more. They are far more confident at night. So this means that if they can fight at night, then it doesn't matter so much if they're outnumbered. In fact, it helps if they are outnumbered, because remember, at night you have to be doubly careful that you're not hitting your own people. So if you actually outnumber your opponent, that's actually a disadvantage because you have to be even more careful because there's a higher likelihood of you seeing a ship of you thinking it's enemy, but it actually being your own side. So this is the problem they have. This is what the Navy and the Royal Navy especially has to deal with. But if they're outnumbered, they can play that one. And fight at long range, it's task forces, not fleet. They're not expecting to have a full fleet engagements. They would love to have a full fleet engagement, but they aren't really expecting it. They're expecting task forces. They're expecting groups of a carrier, 2 carriers, and a couple of battleships to be some of your fighting groups. They're expecting these things to be organized. RAF4, been waiting for months for this lecture and caught held me up. Well, don't worry. You haven't missed much so far. And it's, it's a different thing. And this leads to the tribal class. Now, interesting enough, AIM has just done a nice question. You've mentioned the tribals are the first multi-purpose destroyers. I thought the Fubuki class, which were not treated as cruisers, were considered the first multi-purpose destroyers. They are by some, but they weren't designed to be. and they don't act as them and aren't treated as such until wartime forces them to be. Whereas the tribal class are designed and treated to be from the beginning. So this is why I say the tribals are the first. Hi, Night Home Productions. And, consider that. They are they're £513,412 on average. And think about how that compares to the K class and the Didos. Their overall length, powered by three Admiralty free drum boilers, driving via turbine 2-geared shafts, it all gives them a strength. Their speed is their advantage. They still maintain destroyer speed, but here's the really clever thing for their engines. They can do almost cruiser endurance with destroyer speed on a ship which displaces a third of the tonnage. That's some good engineering work. So, Albert Swarovski. So that's why the A2I class was small and regarded weaker to other navies' counterparts. They were to operate in swarms rather than alone. Yes, and they were to not only operate in swarms, they were to operate in swarms with what was built later. Had always sort of been considered the idea of destroyer leaders. They would either be operating behind cruisers, or when they found they couldn't build enough cruisers and they were building tribals, they were going to be operating behind the tribals. In fact, in my book of many, many things, which has lots of details in it, and I enjoy, I have a quote, which is pretty good for this one. Tribals will be used to supplement cruisers in reconnaissance and screening duties, including screening aircraft carriers, and as support for destroyers in opening the way for torpedo attack. They may also be used for shadowing at night and to supplement the anti-aircraft fire of battleships, one tribal forming astern of each battleship when air attack is anticipated. Pretty much their role is to be the sharp edge of the wedge. This is what they thought. This is why the tribals found it annoying when their little H-class buddies were beaten up at Narvik. Because in the tribals lexicon, the purpose of the tribal was you would have 3 or 4 of them at the front, and you would have a couple of flotillas of destroyers behind them, and these ships would clear out the way. Their job wasn't to launch a torpedo attack, although they carried their own torpedoes. Their job was to clear the path for the other destroyers. Anything gets in the way of those destroyers, which can be a decisive hit in battle, the tribal was to take it out. Anything, by whatever means, were necessary. That was the tribal's way. In one exercise in 1939, they actually slam into a light cruiser. I think it's one of the Arethusa class. They managed to not, it's only a glancing blow, so it doesn't take either out of action, luckily, before the war. But that is how aggressive they even are in training. Their job is to clear the path for the other destroyers. Their job is to make sure those torpedoes get through, because the torpedoes are critical to fighting a battle. Force 1, interesting 1934 small fleet cruiser, alternative to the V leader that led to the tribals, was expected to do 38 knots, whilst the V leader was expected to do 36. Yes, and these are the Arethusa and Dido class, which I talked about earlier. These are the two class of light cruisers which I compared them to. And honestly, I would say the Arethusa class are actually the better light cruisers. They certainly are, in my opinion, anyway. But yeah, the V leader comes out as faster because it has a lot of effort put into it. Its engines, the system that's put in them, they are put the best turbines they can get, the absolute top of the line turbines, the absolute top of the line power generation unit. Everything is done to make them as powerful and as capable as possible. Gary, the line between small cruiser and large destroyer seems blurry. Both fulfill some of the same functions. It is very blurry in this point. Other navies try to keep it more distinct and more definite, but in the Royal Navy in the late 1930s, it's blurred to become almost insignificant. In fact, you have occasions when admirals are offered didos and actually ask for tribals instead, because they go, no, this is going to require surface work, and the tribals are better at that. And you have all sorts of scenarios come up. But interesting enough, during World War II, our refusers and tribals, didos and tribals, become hunting packs often together. You often have a scenario, when they want the king taken to Malta, he's put on an HMS Arefuser, I think, herself, and is put in a swarm of tribal destroyer class. She's, she has 2 or 3 tribals with her, plus a couple of other destroyers, to get her to Malta. And again, the tribals are given the orders. It doesn't matter what comes your way. Nothing touches that cruiser. Nothing at all. And the commanders of the tribals take that because that's what they're supposed to do. That is their orders. That is the raison d'etre of the tribal class in this way. The other destroyers, especially the bigger ones which are built later, start to take this on, especially as tribal numbers go down. So they also get a similar policy that sometimes some missions are so critical that whatever is necessary, you do your duty. The enemy aren't getting through. But it's something which is in the tribals from the beginning. Class next. Okay, they're going to be next. I'm not sure why it's pausing. Sorry about that. Not sure why it paused. Pause for a second. Fleet Cruiser U. Fourth one. Fleet Cruiser U was considerably smaller than the Refuser class and Didos. 3,500 tons of displacement. Yeah, it was terrible. That was just not an idea. And Osprey 28. And don't worry, you don't miss too much. Albert, but weren't AI flotillas built with dedicated flotilla leaders at some of them? Larger with additional guns and stuff. Yeah, a flotilla leader. Let's put it this way: you have a flotilla leader who's an actual flotilla leader, and then you have the flotilla leaders, which are technically the tribals, which are not really built. They can do the flotilla leader role, but their job isn't to act as a flotilla leader in terms of commanding. Their job is to act as flotilla leader in terms of being its pointy end of the spear. Eamon, when would the tribals be better in surface action than the didos? Shouldn't the extra firepower favour the didos, or is there a greater size and drawback? Basically, the maneuverability of the tribals meant that they were often far more useful in terms of inshore and close area work. So they were often used for that. When there was scenarios going on which involved a lot of close work, the didos would be at a disadvantage and often had to hang back. If you consider, they often used to back up the 10th destroyer flotilla in the channel, and the didos often had to hang a long way back and just provide fire support in terms of illumination rather than actually get involved in the combat. Sounds like they had ordered a second or third batch on the day the war started. They did. They're the Australian and the Canadian tribals. The RAN and the RCN are being ordered. See what Japanese reloading torpedo DDs greater firepower, or did torp surge make them more vulnerable? Look, one of the interesting things with the Royal Navy is you have the Japanese make more thing about their ability to reload because they have specific things built in to help with reloading, and it's far less manual. But the Royal Navy also, to an extent, carry reloads for their destroyers. There is a little bit of a debate of how many they carry, though, because it seems certain ships do possibly carry more than they were supposed to during World War II. So it becomes a sort of issue. But the Royal Navy do not. The destroyers, they might carry one set of launchers, but they don't necessarily not have a full reload. It just takes them longer to reload than the Japanese, who have dedicated reloading systems. Seriously, Doc, what did you change in your setup besides your mic? I'm working. It's working amazing at the moment. Hopefully. Basically, I've not just changed I've changed the mic, and I've got a new webcam. And the webcam does a lot of the buffering itself to help the system, so it doesn't overtax the system. And if I'm very kind of it and don't run a chat on the main screen, so I run it on the phone, I can do it this way. But I have to admit, when I'm doing brew ships on a Sunday, it'll be done over the phone, and I'll have the chat on the screen just so I can see the chat more easily. Because at the moment, I'm having to sort of go, Trent besides the fact that tribal class were far superior at sea keeping, how did they stack up again compared to the USN Summers class destroyers? They pretty much managed to stack up quite well, mainly because of their maneuverability. They had a very, very good maneuver, a very high level maneuverability, and that was their advantage. Often they could turn rings quite literally around their opponents, especially some of the cruiser classes they ended up fighting against the Italians. Donna Freeman, read torpedoes and trebles. Could you mount a second set of torpedo tubes on top of the quad launcher? Not officially. Not officially. Night Home Production. In terms of mechanical specs and just all-round crew tenacity, how do trebles and Fletchers and any IJM equivalent stack up? Look, they all have elite crews, but you have to realize that in navies they have different groups of elites. The American destroyer force becomes elite during World War II with the actions of leaders like Arleigh Burke, etc. They set an example, and the destroyer force comes of age during World War II. The Royal Navy's destroyer force had come of age in many ways with the Harwich force in World War I, so they had that esprit de corps to build upon. And they regarded themselves as an elite anyway. It took them a while to get the recognition they deserved, but they did regard themselves as an elite. And what you have in 1939 is you have a scenario where the Royal Navy destroyer force, which considers themselves an elite anyway, have these destroyers in them, the tribals, which are the elite of the elite. So let's put it this way. It would be like the destroyer force is the Royal Marines, and the tribals are the SBS, the Special Boats Squadron. Or if you're an American, the destroyer force are the Rangers, and the tribals are Delta. That is the sort of scenario you're dealing with. They already consider themselves elite. They are smaller crews. They are far more well known to each other. Their officers and men have a far greater level of what they would consider dedication. They live, they work together. They know each other far more intimately than they would on a larger ship. And they are critical for it. And by working through this is what they are. So I would say that other navies have the potential for a tribal class scenario in terms of their ships, and they do have equivalent ships. They do have equivalent in terms of their skill level to an extent, but matching the esprit de corps, that's a different thing. There is HMS Gurkha, which charges an air attack. There is HMS Sikh, which charges a battleship solo. Come on. HMS Sikh charges the Littorio Veneto solo and just goes, Littorio, you're not going to get through. You are not going to get through to the convoy. The cruisers were the other side of the convoy. Everything else was the other side of the convoy. And HMS Sikh just went, right then, you can come from this convoy, but you're going to have to get past me. And even after she'd run out of torpedoes, and this is an interesting thing, because my own reckoning is that she fires 12 torpedoes during this convoy, including 3 at the battleship, and then she's run out of them. She's still charging at the battleship and scaring because they are sure she must have more. So this is what this class is about. And this is the list of the class, and it's tiny. So if you don't mind, I'm going to disappear for a second. And as you can see, only 4 of the class survived World War II, but, consider the names chosen. Cossack, Gurkha, Maori, Mohawk, Nubian, Zulu, Sikh, Eskimo, Mashona, Somali, Tartar, Matabale, Punjabi, Ashanti, and Bedouin. That is the cross. That is the Royal Navy's destroyer tribals, and this is what they're for. There we go. Okay. So, 3-inch increase in beam allows for a 9-inch increase in the bridge height. Jim, don't worry, we'll be getting on that one. That's in the battle class. Andy Folds, I thought we were starting at 1830 hours. It's always 6. It's always 6. Ian Carr. Were Stanley Goodall and other naval designers RN or civilian? If latter, private or civil service? They were RN. They went to many of them went to Dartmouth and were considered naval personnel. They had a sort of naval rank, so they're sort of a mixture of being civilian but also naval. And Stanley Goodall actually starts out training to be a naval officer. Thinks he's going to be an engineering officer, and then decides, actually, no, I'm going to be a constructor. When did the light cruiser role as a flotilla leader role die out? RS Units Model 1 and the IJN was Model 2. How did the RN Doctrine change? The RN Doctrine changed really because they realized they weren't going to be using mass flotillas of destroyers. They started thinking it's going to be mixed flotillas of destroyers, and you're going to have a mixture of leaders, which are better be far more powerful than the existing leaders, which is why you start with the battle class, and other destroyers, and that's what they start to work towards. So it's the Royal Navy starts heading down this route in the mid 1930s, late 1930s. Some people start to pick up on it than others, but it happens. Gary, most of the RN flotilla leaders were early war losses, sadly. Yeah. 73 North. How would the proposed super tribals instead of the L class have differed from the original tribals? I'm going to get to that, actually, because I'm going to save that for right at the end, because I have some special slides at the end of this presentation to go through with that. Same Burrows on its yellow run against Yamato. Hello, I'm glad I didn't completely miss the good doctor's favorite subject. Yeah. 3 years to build a ship, 300 years to build a tradition. In the Tribal's case, well, this is HMS Eskimo, with bow attached for once. It's always good to know she can keep her bow. The Alan M. Summers and the Roberts H. Ships do stack up okay against the Tribals. They're the equivalents. These aren't bad ships, and this is the thing. When I talk about the tribal class, I'm often talking about them, but I don't say that means other ships are bad ships. The reason the tribals I am so interested in is because so many are lost that there's a traditional perspective that they must have been bad ships when actually the reverse is true. But also, that it's interesting to me is that going hand in hand with this technical thing is the Royal Navy is setting out from the beginning to give them a culture, to give them a sense of being an elite within an elite. Basically, the Royal Navy creates this sort of benchmark and then dares the crews to jump up to live up to it. And actually, the crews go, we'll do better than that, and they jump over it. And this is the sort of interesting thing. I do many jokes about HMS Eskimo. But she's also a good-looking ship. And what's interesting, this one. This is her on patrol during the Spanish Civil War. And what you can see is if you zoom in very closely, and I'll expand this one up again. If you look at the row of men standing alongside a turret, a mount, which I've expanded up, that's the A gun crew. So when I talk about a gun crew being wiped out by the torpedo blast and B mount continuing on firing, that's the number of people manning those guns. Those men are the crew would have been the crew from A mount. That's who were wiped out in a destroyer blast. Well, I don't know if it was those particularly, because I think some of them had swapped over by that time, but that's what we're talking about. That's the number of people. And I'm hoping King George V is on here today, because there is a special picture included in this entirely for him, which you'll see in a bit. Sure, Mac, does she look better with or without the bow? I'd say she looks better with the bow, but she does carry off without the bow quite well. Unfortunately, that's the maximum I can zoom. I did in a practice try zooming more and it managed to break the system. So I'm sorry. That's the maximum I can zoom with this current system. And I have to be very slowly and do it manually. If I try and do it computerized, it causes it to have a panic attack. Right then. This is two steely looking things. Two very steely looking things. Andy Full, surely the tribals were also a delayed response to general growth in destroyer sizes, such to an extent, but not really. That was certainly used as a justification for them, but it wasn't really. That wasn't really what the Royal Navy were thinking about. As we can see, HMS Eskimo post Narvik and Captain Philip Bean. And by the way, Maritime Quest is where I got all these pictures because I bought them from them for my book, and I hope they don't mind me using them. Gary, there does seem to be view in some quarters that the high RN destroyer losses somehow makes them bad ships, inferior to other navies' destroyers. The reality is that they just keep getting used for so much. This is HMS Eskimo. He loses her bow in Narvik. And unfortunately, she doesn't have Philip Vian along in command of Cossack this time. Daniel, I'm not quite sure how that got through. Okay. I am sure, Mac. I actually do have a desktop I've built out myself. I have a gaming machine I have built myself, but it's not coming down till after the computers with the publishers. But I have got a gaming machine, and I will get that up and set it up and see how it works. That is pretty much what she did. As I said in the introduction, they shot off her bow. She lost A to A mount. So she turned around and engaged him. Actually, she goes at an angle so that B mount can continue firing. And X and Y can do it. I'm not saying any of it. It is but a scratch from the Black Knight. Jerison, I thought destroyer captains held the rank of commander. Right, so Philip Vian was the flotilla leader, so he was the captain. Okay, he would command his own ship, either Cossack, usually a 3D, but when she was in maintenance or sunk, Cossack, and the commanders of the other ships would be commanders or even lieutenant commanders. So it's an interesting scenario that the captain would usually be if you meet a person who's a captain of destroyers in this period, that means they are a flotilla leader. So that means they are a very important person in the nicest way of things. They often have more preeminence in a way than most cruiser captains because they are the captain of the flotilla. They command a unit. They're a tactical unit commander. Right then. This is her again in pedestal. So, she goes into Narvik. She loses a bow. How does the Royal Navy reward her? They send her to Mediterranean for convoy duty. She also does the Arctic and even gets out to the Far East to fight the Japanese later on in the war. So, in a nicest way, if ships keep being sent into this level of combat, and that's the trouble for the Royal Navy, they have a lot of destroyers which they can use for convoy work. They have rather less destroyers, and the trouble is new builds don't really start entering service till 1942-43 time. That they have to rely on the same ships over and over again for fighting the battles and fighting the wars. So this is why these ships suffer. This is why you've got a commando raid. What do you use? The tribals. You've got all sorts of things. The tribals keep going out and being used and used again. And honestly, you can only push your luck so many times. There's only so many times you can go, right then, you have a 10% chance of surviving this mission. Yes, we came back. Yes, we came back. Eventually, you don't come back. Hello, supply officer. What about job we got buy two, go on free? That's probably the case. Yeah. Danny Freeman, the short story is that HMS Eskimo survived World War II. The more nuanced answer is that most of HMS Eskimo survived World War II. Well, she only got through 2 completely rebuilt bows. That's completely new bows. Depending on how you fix it, 2 semi-rebuilt bows. HMS Nubian lost her stern. We can go through them. They lose bits. The only one which gets through World War II completely intact, virtually, is HMS Asante, which, as we all know, was blessed by the Asante tribe, in which she was named for, down in the Gold Coast area of Africa. And as such, I honestly believe that every Royal Navy ship should be blessed by them, because it's obviously successful and works. Unfortunately, HMS Maori doesn't work as well as HMS New Zealand. But HMS Maori didn't get to visit New Zealand, so she didn't actually get blessed. If she had visited New Zealand, I maintain HMS Maori would have been just as survivable as HMS Asante, and there would have been another tribal which survived World War II. The tribals, as Andy Falls put, they did have the heaviest anti-aircraft fit on all the available destroyers, and this is one of the reasons I had the most in demand. Jerison, awesome, thanks. So if a cruiser captain, destroyer, flotilla captain merged into a single squadron, who would command? The man with the bigger ship or the man with the many ships? It would be the one who'd been promoted to captain first. It would be the senior officer. And when Captain Villain was in charge, Ian was in charge, it would be him, whatever, because he just would do what he wanted. Daniel Fritz, how many days of food can they tote around? Well, they used to do the whole Arctic trips without having resupplied, so I'd say a good few weeks. There is an official amount and there is the unofficial amount, and the unofficial amount is slightly bigger. Stromach, it's my understanding the Iron was really caught between changing doctrine in a lot of areas. The Iron was changing doctrine in a lot of areas, but they were trying to move forward. Sounds like if Eskimo was a person, she would be the one you didn't who either sits in the corner or is in the thick of it no matter what. Yeah, usually probably in the thick of it. Jeff Beeler, of the following 16 J and K class DDs, only 2 of each survived the war. Yeah, it's the rough statistic. It's about 4 of them survive. Ian Carr, all tribals including RC and Iran were built in the UK. Yes. This is HMS Matabale. I love this picture of her. She is one of the ones which is really quite special, and it's shame the way she's lost. But she does go, she fights the whole way through her war. She really does fight for her war. Andy Falls, Vian would ask what year the Calvert Captain was commissioned, then adjust his own commission made accordingly. Probably. Sony Falls, who blessed Lucky Jervis then? Also lost about running. In Jervis's case, it's kind of like Tartar. Tartar also was called Lucky, and she never got blessed either. But no, she did lose her bow, so you can't say she's quite as lucky as Asante was. She was very, very lucky. Free food source endurance on paper amount, real amount, and the men are about to mutiny. The paper amount is theoretically roughly 30 days. The real amount I've seen them have 40 days, and they're an RN tribal crew. We're talking about ships where HMS Nubian solo decides to take back an island from the Italians in the middle of the Mediterranean. They wouldn't mutiny, they'd find enemy stores. Seriously. There's always the classic case of, we're Operation Claymore, we have crack commandos going in for this operation. Where did all these naval crewmen come from? There are Germans this way. We're heading there. Who let the tribals on? They have a lot of fun with this one. Jeff Bieler, Canada completed 4 tribals post-war with 4 AA instead of 4.4-inch AA instead of 4.7, so more of a subclass. Yes and no. They are still built to the tribal design, so I'll be nice. I'll consider them part of the class. But, completing 4 post-war shows how good they were. They're still being built post-World War II. Of all the tribals, UK, Canada, Australia, which did the most damage to the enemy during the war? I would think Haida, but Eskimo exists. HMS Nubian. Nubian very nearly beats Warspite. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that destroyers get campaign honours rather than battle honours, Nubian would beat Warspite. So that's my pet peeve, because HMS Nubian rocks in so many ways, and there's a picture of it here in this now. Surface submarine inside 0.5 miles of an Iron Destroyer? Yes, Andy Ford, that's about it. Richard Hughes, if it isn't nailed down, help yourself. Yeah, pretty much again. If when you get a tribal to command of the clock, it will have the endurance entirely depend on quantity of iron brew carried. Well, iron brew, you can store a lot more of iron brew than you can food. You honestly can. One of these has water in it. It's water time. I try to alternate iron brew and water, just, so the caffeine and other stuff in the iron brew doesn't completely, how do I put this politely, take over. Did they ever try to install 62-pound on the tribals? I understood they were designed to take them. They did. They decided not to. They found they didn't need it, and it was far easier to manhandle the ones they had. Glenn Freeman. Actually, no. What happened was HMS Nubian went round and round the island, firing at the Italians, slowly getting closer and closer and closer, until the Italians decided that they would come out by boat and surrender en masse. And then the tribals crew dismounted from their ship, and several of them went ashore to find the Italian commander. Make sure he realized his forces had surrendered to them. Now, I put in this picture for HMS King George V because I know how much he enjoys HMS Hood. So there you go. There's Hood with HMS Zulu. Jervis is well up there for battle honors too. Yes, she is. There are quite a few iron destroyers which are. If you start, as I said, especially if you decided to treat their battle honors like they treat battle honors rather than battleships, which is a battleship turns up, it's a battle, so they get a battle honor, whereas a destroyer turns up, fights a freaking 4 cruisers, beats the living daylights out of them, sinks them, and they still go, oh no. Age of Sangan and Sydney's Agamemnon sees you redefining war honors. Yes, it would work. Alston Harmon, a tribal class more angry than are in battleships. Not surprised. They were really quite angry. This was, as you can see, during the Spanish Civil War. That's why they have the markings on B turrets and B mounts to distinguish them as Allied ships. They had an interesting time during that. In fact, the tribal class got to play ambulance at one point for a British ambassador who was injured in Spain, and they took him off the beach and ran him to France to get him medical attention. And maybe had a little of an argument with some Spanish Spanish nationalists on the way, I think. Ian Carr, have seen photos of German destroyer wrecks still in Narvik. Is Eskimo Bow still there? Probably. Thank you, Jay Richardson. Filling in the hoods. Svung, when they upgraded the AA on the tribals, was the 4-inch good fit for it, or would as many 40mm as you can get your hands on be a better one? What they chose. What they did was they replaced the X mount. That's the one you can actually see second in on this picture from the stern, with a 4-inch high-angle gun quite early on in the war to give them a boost in AA. They also did take as many light as they could, and quite a lot of them, well, the ones out in the out operating in the ocean against the Japanese do seem to have been putting in requests, I think, for 40mm ammunition. So My thinking is that they could well have had it, but again, I cannot find the paperwork which shows that they were officially fitted with it. So there is a limit to what one can prove. And one always has to be careful in these things. You know, what one writes in a book has to be absolutely provable. What one writes in a journal article has to be absolutely provable. When I'm talking on here, I can be honest and go, I suspect this, but I cannot prove it. So if you can find the proof or disprove me, that's great. I would love to know. But on this one, the 40 millimeters, the new AKB 4472. So tribal class have Napoleon syndrome. They have something. Kargan, I'm very late. Hello to Belgium. As you can see, we're here with HMS Soon. Don't worry, we're only just sort of getting through the tribals, and it's been about an hour almost already. So I'm hoping I don't run too behind times. Veteran assuming, I do wonder how the fighting around Guadalcanal would have gone with some Aran tribals there. I don't think the Arunta can handle it by herself. It would have been interesting. There was also an early war shortage of 40mm Bofors. There was a big shortage of 40mm Bofors because everyone wanted it. It's a wonderful gun. 40mm Bofors at this time is basically a hallelujah. It's arrived. That is sad. It is sad KGV isn't here, especially when I have HMS Hood for him. Right then. Battle class. No, more like an unending bloodlust and desire to destroy the foes. Yeah, pretty much. That is. It's something. It's certainly something. Drink more Admiral, more caffeine, faster, more doggy. Yeah, maybe. Emin, why were the Didos built instead of more tribals? Because there was still a debate going on as to whether or not tribals are destroyers. So I can get into that at one point. There's going to be at the end. I've got some special slides for a debate to discuss some of the stuff that went on, but I want to wait to the end to do it because I want to reveal some things as I go. So Stanley Goodall. Stanley Goodall is director of naval construction who basically turns what Henderson comes up with into reality. He's the one who translates the ideas into steel for Henderson. Nighttime production. When did 40mm Bofors come into production? Ooh, that was about. Oh, good lord! When the 40mm? I think 40mm Bofors. I think they start production in the early 1930s, but I seem to remember some things in the earlier in the 1920s as well were going on. $40mm pom poms pretty good, and the tribals did get outfitted with pom poms quite quickly. From memory, they do have some pom poms fitted, so they have certain sort of advantages. Right then, so Stanley Goodall, nice guy, really nice guy, and really hard worker. But he designed. So between him and Henderson, that is your fleet for World War II designed for the Royal Navy, pretty much. Henderson sets out the theories which will guide it and develops several of the ideas, and this is the person who turns it into actual reality. And it's good he's around because he works on the battle class. And as we can see, they are not that hugely different to the tribals. Length, draft, beam, all these things are not that massively different. And there is a reason for that. The reason is that in many ways, the battles are a continuation of the tribals because Henderson had a whole fight over the L-class destroyers. He wanted more tribal continuations, and the Royal Navy really didn't. And in the end, he had to accept a reduction in what he wanted in order to get other things built. And the other things he wanted built were Hunt-class escorts, destroyers, all sorts of things, HMS Unicorn and various other things he wanted built. So he had to accept a concession, and he had to make it because he was pretty much ordered to by Lord Chatfield. And pretty much if your first Sea Lord is making it complete enough to order, you have to theoretically do it. Third Sea Lord can dodge a lot, but a direct order is very difficult to dodge. Okay. Bofors is slightly. There's a question from Trent Telenko. Question: 40mm pom pom versus 30mm Bofors. Pom pom seems to provide more firepower per ship deck position. Why Bofors then? Okay, so the pom pom is better for shorter range. If your enemy's getting closer, the Bofors has a slightly longer range, slightly higher accuracy at longer range. So slightly longer range. So that's why by later war they prefer the Bofors. At the beginning of war, the pom pom is very lovely though, and the tribals do have pom poms from memory. But they also get 40mm Bofors, I think, by the end. My suspicion, I said, is that they get it by the end of war as well. Jeff Beeler, how different the hull design was Tribal class from preceding I class? They had a far more raked and developed hull. It was a far bigger, far deeper in some respects hull. So it was a far more. They did a lot of shaping work in the National Physical Laboratory and various of the various organizations which they could get access to. Wind tunnels, and I think those great big tanks which they use for testing hulls. Denver, I'm not sure when Britain got their hands on any Bofors, nor when they started making lots of them. They start making lots of them during World War II, but they get their hands on them earlier than that. Right, so now, one of the points I made earlier was about the between-deck mountings on the battle class and suspecting where they come from because suddenly so many appear. And my suspicion is that they come from the D class, that what could have been going to be assigned to the D class. Now, the thing is, the D class cruisers can take between deck mountings. Quite a lot of light cruisers do have between deck mountings, and the D class cruisers could have been reorganized for a between deck mounting. They would have preferred an upper deck mounting. They would certainly prefer an upper deck mounting, but if they can't get hold of one, then they could have fitted a between deck mounting as a necessity. And Henderson was, let's be honest, quite big on necessity being the mother of all invention. And I have a feeling that the D class, if he had the time and had been able to do the installation work, the D class might well have found themselves with some between deck 4.5s on them. I also think the 4.5s being fitted to destroyers might have been slightly different as well. But I think he ran out of time, and it would have been an interesting scenario because he would have been arguing from the post of probably a CNC somewhere. Can you explain on the difference between deck and upper deck turrets? What impact does that make? So, right. Okay. A between deck and an upper deck turret. An upper deck is literally the mount is extraneous to the ship. So it's all balanced on top of whichever position it's put in. Between deck, actually the mechanisms and other things are built on the deck below. So it might well have machinery down below it. And actually, it means you have more space in the turret if you do it, because that means you have less taking up space in there. But see, it tends to be upper decks turrets amounts tend to be more cramped and more to sort of have more things built in them. But between deck stretches down and requires you to work on inside the ship because you have to make space for it on the deck beneath beneath your gun. So you lose that space. So that's why HMS Savage, whenever people tell me, "Oh, she's just another S-class destroyer," I go, "She's really not. She is a between deck mount, which means, unlike all the other ones, she's had to lost that space underneath her forward gun, which means they've had to move stuff around, which means that stuff has to have gone somewhere. And if you move one thing, you then have to move other things around because if, for example, when we're talking about the battle class, I mention often that the between the 1942 and 1943, they grow 3 inches in beam, and the control position is raised 9 inches. The deck height of the control position is raised 9 inches. And it's raised 9 inches because the gun, which is a platform which is designed for a 4-inch gun to provide illumination, is changed to a 4.5-inch gun, which requires a different type of platform, which is actually slightly higher, which then that creates an effect on the ship and the way the wind pattern but also its elevation and how it can target. So you have to move the guns you have to start to play around with the superstructure, and you have to move that up 9 inches so that the 4.5-inch at the back can still get its firing positions and won't hit the ship. So you have all these things as a factor. The moment you start mucking around with one thing, it has an impact on the other. So if you have a between deck mount, that has an impact on the internals of the ship. And that is why usually for especially the smaller cruisers and destroyers and smaller ships, they preferred upper deck mounts, UD mounts. Ian Carl, what's the difference in how upper deck through deck mounts would be operated? Not really, more in terms of the space and in terms of people layout, because everyone's crammed into the upper deck mount, whereas in a between deck mount you get some people down below and some people above. So there are those sort of differences, but it's pretty much the same otherwise. Albert's absolutely how 4.5-inch compared to 4.7-inch against ships and Sean's bombers wasn't going down with a caliber weakening in that part. Not particularly. The 4.5-inch was actually plenty good enough. It didn't lose much of the 4.7. But the good thing is, because it was that much easier to maneuver and had that much less cantilever space, you could actually raise it higher. And you have to remember that these ones, the ones on the Mark 6s on the Darings can go up to 80 degrees. These can go 75-ish if they want. Theoretically, it's officially 70, but reality they could go to 75, and some could even go a bit higher. And fire very, very fast and very, very long, high as an anti-aircraft weapon. So it worked. And as Andy Falls pointed out, the 4.5-inch projectiles are actually heavier than the 4.7-inch Mark 12 ammo, so it's a heavier fire and more of it. There is that advantage. They also have a slightly higher velocity when they're leaving, so they do tend to create about a little bit more damage. But it's much of a muchness, really, between the two, and then in terms of anti-ship capability. Because the 4.7 was better to bounce. Great stream, and the visual layout works over really well. A question though, why did the RN choose a low velocity 0.5 Vickers Bodge over the 50 Browning quad? Because they thought they were more likely to keep Vickers supply going. That's the thing. And don't get me started on the Vickers. The Britain has some very interesting procurement practices in the late 1930s, and it doesn't necessarily make everyone happy. Sometimes I swear some it's done just to keep certain manufacturers going because they need them. Shell handling rooms just below the gun house was standard on larger ships as intermediate stage between magazines and gun bridges. Yeah, they have. If you consider cruisers, if you ever go down in the in the hull of HMS Belfast, you can look right up to the guns practically from below, so you can see all these things going on and all the sort of scenarios. They have space. And the battles are designed for it, but it does also make them a bit more cramped. It's one of those things. It does make them a bit more cramped because it fills in their spaces that much more. Always wondered how the feed mechanism worked for the open gun shield mounts. Is there a feed tube pushing up shells, or two sailors grabbing shells fed through the superstructure to the gun dock? Never seen. Right, so they would have what's called a gun store, a shell store, and that would be close to the gun, and they'd be running ammunition to there. Sometimes they would have a feeding system in some types of ships, but in others, the feed was literally people running around carrying the shells up to the store. Paul, who wants to get him started on the Vickers? I'm trying not to get started on the Vickers. It turns into a rant. It's just terrible. You know, in nicest way, the Vickers was one of the most unreliable weapons known to mankind, but its marketing was very good, and they aimed its marketing directly at the Air Ministry, who then informed the government that it was the best thing that had to be bought since sliced bread. And the Admiralty went, well, if that's what the Air Ministry, they must know what air defence is, so we'll buy it. So, and then, of course, once it's put on a ship, it's far more difficult to remove and change than it is when it's on a land position and turning to be terrible. Gary, didn't Mountbatten push for Oricons at the start of the war? Mountbatten claims a lot of things post-war that he pushed for. He didn't actually in reality. In reality, Mountbatten at the beginning of World War II is a relatively junior officer who the admirals really try and ignore. If it wasn't for his connections and his ability to get close to Churchill, he wouldn't have got half the positions he got. But I do enjoy these ships. The battle class do look good, and the trouble is for them is that because of the between deck mountings, because of the other differences of their layouts, the heavy anti-aircraft, these ships were the most powerful anti-aircraft platforms the Royal Navy was building towards the end of World War II. If these things had made it out to the Far East in time for the invasion of Japan, which is what they were aiming for, they would have literally been critical for the Royal Navy operations. Because remember, the Royal Navy understood, and the Americans understood this, that due to the differences in carrier construction, the odds were American carriers would suffer almost unacceptable losses on any invasion of Japan. They would lose a lot of them because of the nature of the kamikaze threat and the nature of their construction. They would suffer a lot of damage. They might not lose the ships themselves, but they would lose a lot, have a lot of mission killed. I.e., those ships would be out of action for weeks, if not months. So the Royal Navy really did emphasize needing AA defense to make sure that its carriers, which were supposed to survive this, would survive it and would have the firepower to protect them from it. Paul Johnson, what was the best thing before sliced bread? Wine, I'm presuming. In car, lettering numbering for our destroyers seems random. Is there a system? There was a system, but it changes regularly throughout World War II to try and keep the enemies guessing which ships were which. The only ones who really understood it were the Allies, weren't even the Navy sometimes. Veteran assuming, yes, I have heard that the Vickers 40mm was beaten by the Bofors 40mm. But it depends on the metrics you're looking for. You know, the Vickers 40mm is good for some things. The Bofors 40mm is good in other ways. A lot of these things are subjective. It depends what you're looking for. Didn't one battle class see service in BPF in 1945? Yes, one managed to arrive, HMS Barfleur, before the war was over, but she didn't. She squeaks in just in time for a bit of service, but doesn't really get to see much. It's literally a squeak. Sure, Mac, everyone does self-serving revisionism except for German generals. They never did any self-serving revisionism, particularly Halder, who is history's most unbiased historian. Yeah. No German generals ever done, or German admirals have never done any revisionism. Right then. She does look good, but actually there is something better coming up. I saved one. We have HMS Agincourt. And I do point out the battle class is basically the Royal Navy trolling the French, let's be honest. The whole thing is the Royal Navy trolling the French. The entire names of the class, as I said earlier, are the Royal Navy going, these are all our battles over the French. You've been annoying us for the last 4 years. For the last 3 years in the case of 1942. We are going to name our premier destroyers after every time we've kicked your butts. Just to remind you to stop being so annoying. Getting convoys lost. Danny Freeman, RN ships during the war. Quick, change the number, painted in the hull. The art tribals can't. We just painted on shark mouths. Actually, there's all sorts of rumors about some of the stuff they painted on. When the camo paints were sent around from the regular, they did come up with some interesting ideas. Rob Donaldson, why did the depth markings carry up onto the deck? Depth markings carrying up to deck. Oh, that's usually to work out how loaded they are, how laden they are. Jeff Ealer, what is the relationship between the weapon class and battle class? Technically, the battle class were the fleet destroyers. The weapon class were the next generation war emergency intermediate destroyers. So the weapon class was supposed to be the sort of super Cs, basically. They were not enough of an advantage to keep them going. The battle class were kept going in production. Incar, never seen depths above Plimsoll line, right up deck level before. Seems unnecessary, unless its bow is blown off and sinks. Why might this have been done? I'm not suggesting that there was particularly some particular reasons, but you know. And also there's the fact that the battle class have an interesting relationship with how fast can you push through heavy seas. And they used to try full speeds through storms in the Atlantic, etc. So there is some reasoning behind it. Albert Husky, battles look a bit like some American designers had involvement. Oh, a flat surface. Let's put an air gun there. No, it's not American, unfortunately. American would be a good excuse. It really isn't. See what? Eisenhower said he studied theatrics under MacArthur. That would be useful. In previous doc. Not this one. Oh, in the case of Gravelines, that is actually, as I said, to do with the. That is to do with their desire to go through quite high seas. That was to try and measure how high the waves were coming up as part of her tests. Did the French return the favour with ship names, or did they just keep to condiments? Yeah, they mainly didn't return the favour. SN Pi. Plus, the French believe that it is they that liberated France as compared to the remaining allies who, according to them, only played a minor role. Yeah, well, you know, we all have dreams. There's HMS Sleaze for you. Now, that is one of my favourite pictures of battle class because that just looks so aggressive, so potent, so there. And you can tell it's one of my favourite pictures of a battle class because, voila, it's on my screen. The battle class are designed to be as fighting a destroyer as you can possibly make them. And the trouble is, to do that, you have to sacrifice some things. And due to the compromises made to get the 4.5-inch guns in the service when they were desperately needed, so they're between decks, you have to move stuff around. So they become far more cramped comparatively than their tribal class or the daring class, which is why they suffer in comparison. They are good ships, but in terms of the back pocket cruisers, they are closer to Didos in many respects than they are tribals or darings. Inkar, is there any truth in the story of two junior staff being responsible for suggesting names for smaller iron ships and trying to outdo each other? No, it was two quite senior captains, and they were both still trying to outdo each other. Yes, pretty from the front. You see how much they are stuffed full of things when you look aft. She looks very pretty at the front, and then as you go back, you just see everything that's been stuffed into them. Shomac, I mean, what's That's what Monty and Ike said at one point when they didn't know what the Ghoul was saying, so it must be true. Yeah, possibly. And Jack Ray, the fuck. Did the battle class 2 turrets forward cause them to be bow heavy like the US Gearings? Actually, no, they managed to balance them out pretty well. Now, there is a thing, though, I would point out with the battle class is that the amount of people who turn around to me and go, "Oh, that's because the Royal Navy," as I said in the thing, that's because the Royal Navy realised you didn't need guns aft. It wasn't. It was because turrets are expensive, because turrets are difficult to manufacture, because it takes time and it's problematic. So, what they did instead was they basically looked at the study and they said, well, they can get away with it as long as they're mounted as far forward as they can do so they can swivel round. And they can therefore cover cover aft as much as possible. That is why they're designed as they are, and it works. Paul, what was the livability like on the ships? What were thoughts were given to crew comforts? Okay, tribals had fairly good crew comforts for their times. They had space, they had good galleys, and these are the things. Battles are war builds, and honestly, whilst they're fairly stable ships, the crew were pretty uncomfortable. Okay, they still definitely were sleeping in hammocks, and they didn't have much in the way of a lot of space, but they did have facilities on them which they didn't have on other destroyers. These were very good, well-appointed destroyers in some respects because they were supposed to operate out in the Far East and far away from home creature comforts. So they did have some good things on them and some space. Gary, in the design of that battle class, was there a plan to have second mount installed aft? No. We'll get into some of the design considerations later. There's a point I want to get into. Picture reminds me of an English bull terrier with ears, tails, hackles fully raised. Yeah, I can imagine that. Then didn't the battle class have their squid AS mounted at the stern? Yes. I guess they launched just off the side when chasing down subs. Yeah, they did. Some of them actually carried 2 squids. They looked into that one. They are good ships, but they are, because they have to be built in wartime, there are limitations to them. Ooh. Hmm. Yes, as Trent Tlanker pointing out, there is actually the viability that certain of the Japanese weapon systems could have inflicted quite severe damage if they'd wanted to hit. If they'd hit. All right, Danny Freeman. I see HMS Cisco charging down a submarine backwards if she had had a battle class style rebuild. Yeah, definitely something. You don't let that ship out. Nicest way. My theory was they should all the 4 surviving tribals should have been made museum ships, and then kept in case like King Arthur of times of England's greatest need, they would be there and ready to be dispatched. As it is, the Canadians have HMCS Hyder. So, which is why America will never invade Canada. Because with crew or sans crew, HMCS Hyder would come for you. Right then. Daring class. The daring class. They're pretty ships. In full load, Daring's displaced a similar amount of World War One Arethusa class cruiser territory. The 54,000 ship horsepower and 34 knots, but the Daring's over it. So, she's actually bigger than her World War One counterparts, and more powerful. Well, not so much bigger actually. She displaces more. She has more power. She has more horsepower and is able to go faster. In car, both battles and darings have transformed sterns. Well, technically, darings are 1944 battles. Technically. But the Royal Navy, how do I put this? This class were able to be built post World War II. So, if you can build it post World War II, you can do a lot more, how do I put this, work to improve certain things, including their performance in the heavy seas. But this is the HMS Arethusa, the cruiser of 1913. So, daring, launches in 1952. Technically starts construction in 1949. Conceived of, I would argue, a lot earlier than that. Arethusa, 1913 design. $3,568 tons fully loaded. 3,600 tons fully loaded. 40,000 ship horsepower. 54,000 ship horsepower. 30 knots if you're lucky. 34 knots officially, unofficially, they were clocked going 38, 40 knots. And they really, really pushed it. And I have to admit, I will say that the 40 knots is according to a friend who was in one. I haven't actually ever had it confirmed. How does the transfer improve hydrodynamics? It makes it more efficient at high speed, efficiently, because of the way it flattens out the water coming out from it. I think that's what they explained it to me as. Danny Freeman looks better, a bit like how painting it red will make it go faster. It makes it basically it flattens out the water, the transom stern. It flattens. It makes it, if it's rounded, it causes more disturbance. So if it is a transom stern, it comes out flatter and is therefore more focused on propulsion, and there's less disturbance. So more of the energy goes into the water, into pushing you forward. I think is how they put it. S&D Pi, Dr. Clark, I think a battle class destroyer was involved in the Indo-Pak Wars in the 1970s. Yes, they were. There were quite a few were sold to various other nations. But if they're sold to other nations, I'm not including them in the study because I'm having to be nice. I'm keeping it to the source of ones I have the actual sources about, and the Royal Navy ones are the ones I have the source about. So that's what I'm keeping it in the book to. Also, I had to limit the book to roughly 80,000 words. And there is just so much you have to cut out from free classes to cover them adequately in 80,000 words. So, keeping it to the concept is one of the things I've done. Paul, the Washington Naval Treaty saw a lot of ships scrapped. What happened to the guns on those ships? Did they ever try to incorporate them into new builds during World War II, e.g. a destroyer of 6-inch? Not really. It's going to sound terrible, but the metallurgy advances in such a way that certain things are not much use after World War I, and some of the guns really aren't much use. The metallurgy you have on the small guns in World War II makes them far, far better systems than the ones in World War I. The metallurgy has moved on that much. Plus, 6 inches in a slow firing 6-inch and destroyer in World War II would be painful and pointless. Drac once said the 2,000-pound bomb that hit Formidable, I think, and in his armored carrier video, only barely beat the illustrious armor, so I suspect the 800-kilogram bomb may not be able to penetrate it. They were designed to take 1,000-pound bombs, and coming in at certain points, and in other points they could take heavier. So, yeah. Right on. Here you go. Daring class. And I love this because it illustrates to you the realities of the destroyer design. I took this is a picture from the National Archives in the UK. You can see the realities of UD mounts the 3 of them she has, the Mark 6 4.5 inches. And where they get the ammunition from, where everything is stowed, how things are laid out. You can see her organization, you can see her structure. You can also see her hull shape and the way she's been designed under the water for speed, to give her as much power going through the water and as much water and as much performance as possible as she could. Paul Johnson, I know it's a lot of extra work, but would it have been better to do a book on each class? Long term, I might well want to do a book on each class as a class book, but in this one, I wanted to look at the concept of the back pocket cruiser and how it evolved between 1936 and 1952. So that's what I was sort of going for. I was going for this sort of period of time where the Royal Navy was building destroyers with the express role to fill in for their cruiser force, and looking at what those destroyers were doing. There are actually some very good specific books on each of the individual classes as well. So, although there isn't one on the tribals, but I will fix that at some point. King's Rook, I'd like to see a very large version of the image. Well, I might, I might expand it up for you. There you go. I do have actually got a very large version of this image. I have a version of this image which is A3 sized. And I have it digitalized because I got it digitalized by National Archives because it's going in the book. Jeff Beeler, Sleeves went to her arm. Does anyone know her fate? I think I'm not sure if she might be still serving. Not sure. Possibly she's no longer is, but she'd be certainly quite a big ship for them. Jack Ray, AC has less transmission drop-off from wire length than DC. I wonder how that affects things on ships. Well, that was the interesting thing with the Darings. They were a 4 and 4. They were in many respects a 4 batches of 2. In that you have 2 with AC, 4 with AC power, 4 with DC power, and 4 powered by one type of boilers and 4 powered by another type of boilers, but it's actually 2 of each. So there are 2 with AC and 2 with boiler type 1, and 2 with DC and boiler type 1, and 2 with boiler type 2 and the AC, and 2 with boiler type 2 and DC, and it just... Why do this to yourselves? The names that are proposed for some of the Darings seem quite unusual, especially compared to traditional RN and Destroyer names. They are mostly traditional RN Destroyer names, but also some traditional RN D-class names for cruisers. Daring, Diamond, Duchess, Defender, Dainty, Decoy, Delight, and Diana. There were a few other Ds suggested as well. HMS Duncan could have been there, which of course we have with the modern Type 45s. And what was that one? HMS Defender was there, and she wasn't she? Which was the one which wasn't? Not Diomede because they had Diamond. They did have another 4D class picked out because they were considering building 12. And that would have been interesting. Paul Johnson, Wiki says Sleeves was sticking in 1996. Oh, that's sad. Darren Jeff Beeler, World War I guns ended up on armed merchant ships in World War II. Yes, but that's on armed merchant ships, not warships you're building from scratch. In a nicest way, they're taken out of the warehouses for that. Alex Miller, what was the height between interior decks? They had plenty of space. The height between interior decks was about 8 feet. When a Daring's made, Carl Vagasma, when a Daring's made from more advanced and expensive materials than the battles, peacetime ships usually built to more to last. They were certainly built up, yes. not necessarily more advanced, expensive materials, but let's put it this way: the Royal Navy could afford to be more picky over it. Paul, how do you go about sourcing images? Imperial War Museum don't seem to be on par with US equivalents when it comes to archiving and licensing. They really aren't. In this case, I go to the National Archives and I plead, basically. Ian Carr, what electrical systems are in use today? I think it's alternating current, I think. But honestly, now you've asked the question, I'm suddenly second guessing myself. No, I think they did have HMS. Well, I'm sure the next four included HMS Duncan. I think HMS Dutiful. I think there was also talk about HMS Destroyer, but I don't think they would have gone with a destroyer called Destroyer. It would have been quite funny. But they did have sort of different ideas for them. Need an HMS daring named for an HMS World War I officer. Served with Mr. Bean. Danny Freeman, for real presence ship HMS Damocles as a threat. Don't joke. They could have actually gone with that. No, these are some cool pictures, and they come all from a book in the National Archives, in one of the archive books, which is called the ABCD book, ABCD of the Daring class, and that's literally what they're on. Because they had this habit of producing books like this, but I can only find a copy of the ABCD book for the Daring class. I know they produced them for pre-World War II ships and during World War II and some other post-World War II, but the only ones which seem to survive are the ABCD books from the Daring class. I think HMS Darling was another one of the ones. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't joke about that one. HMS Darling has a long and proud history of the Royal Navy, from memory. This is HMS Dainty. She does look very dainty. I'm sure she wouldn't leave much of an impression at all. Definitely would not leave a massive impression on you. Really, would be quite a... And what you can see there is you can see the auxiliary control system at the back. She had two different fire control systems, which she could do, which could control, like all the Daring class, and so she can control her weapon systems, alternatively, if she needed, she had her stern ones. If anything happened to the forward control. But no, I just love the fact that the Royal Navy, one of the Royal Navy's premier destroyers, was called HMS Dainty. I am dainty. And just remember, that means that a captain would have been called Captain Dainty on the orders, because it was the captain of HMS Dainty, so it'd be called Captain Dainty. Admittedly, there'd also been Captain Delight and Captain Duchess. Diamond, Defender, Daring, Decoy, Captain Diana. Yeah, these are fun names to have, but Captain Dainty, yes. Jeff Beeler, Sad News, PNS Caliber, the former British battle class battle destroyer HMS Cadiz, Cadiz acquired by Pakistan in 1956 and sunk in the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. I'm so glad that's not in my book. And Mike Rose, surely the person who originally suggested HMS Desperate must have been joking. Others that weren't used in the same word: Demon, as the name of Demon, Disdain, Dogstar, Dragon, Druid, Dervish, Desire, and Dane. There are a few options they had available. They did have, I think Dragon might have been one of the other ones that were turned down. They were looking, originally they had, the original plans. So, the Royal Navy ends up building 8. But at one point, they were considering building a lot more. And if the government hadn't suddenly started cutting funding even more, they probably would have built a fair number more. Because they built. Because they probably would have liked to have had 16. They certainly had plans for 12. So having 16 would have been quite nice. Andy Folds. Sadly, no HMS Darling in the names for the Daring class. Delight, Desire, Dragon. I've seen it on the list in the archive, so we'll see. And I have this lovely book in front of me, which is Daring Class Destroyers by Neil McCart, which is pretty darn good on them, and has the Australians as well as the British ones in. And does go into a bit into the ones which weren't built. It's fun times. So, here's another diagram of the Daring Class. To give you an idea of what you're talking in terms of outline, you've got twin 40mm, which were very, very fast firing. You've got the 4.5 inches, which could all do AA as well as anti-surface rolls, and actually could be used for some pretty interesting shore bombardment facilities. They originally carried two quintuple torpedo launchers, but over time, the space aft was taken over for offices and spaces, but also was originally planned to be converted to a space for a sea slug launcher. So you'd have the sea slug, it would have gone squid 4.5-inch sea slug aft, and then torpedoes. So they'd have been a really, really powerful ship. Mike Rose, did the Australians always plan on only 3, or did they consider getting more? My theory, thinking always was they were planning on getting at least 4. But as you know, they did just get 3. Again, finances became not the greatest thing in certain periods. And, these happen. I think also you have to remember that one of their ones is actually HMS Duchess, was formerly the HMS Duchess. So it's one of the Royal Navy ones, because economies hit. The 1950s and 1960s are not good economically for a lot of these periods. And you have the cost of developing missile systems, and you also have the people jumping on the bandwagon of, we're only going to need missiles in the future. It's going to be an all-missile Navy. It's all missiles, all missiles. And, we don't need to go east of Suez, and we don't need to do all sorts of things. Everything starts to come out, and honestly, the ships which suffer are the ships which would have been most useful for some of the things we had them available. Because the trouble is, people start focusing on warfighting capability and forget about presence, mission, and peace fighting. And that some of these ships which had already been built would do perfectly for that role and be good extras in war, rather than necessarily they wouldn't be that rather than you should just get rid of them because they weren't perfect for your view of what warfighting now is. Paul, any thoughts on the British concentrating on ship seaworthiness rather than as weapons platforms compared to the Germans who wedged 6-inch guns? Well, the British had the idea that if the ship couldn't actually operate well in the seas, it wouldn't be that good a weapon platform, as the guns wouldn't be able to hit their targets. So that was why the British focused on seaworthiness. Tim Coleman. Same turrets and guns were used for shore bombardment in the Falklands Wars on the landers. They were used on lots of classes in the Falklands War. Counties also had the Mark 6s. And it would have been useful to have had more of them. If you'd imagine for shore bombardment roles, if you'd had a couple of daring class along, which A, carried more ammunition per gun, and B, carried free guns, plus a very heavy A8 armament for dealing with aircraft in the sort of scenarios you would have had in San Carlos, and their radars were probably better actually for the sort of scenario you'd have found yourself in San Carlos. You could have had a far more successful operation and far less casualties. Right then. So, Scene 1. 10 years ago in London, I remember seeing aft windows of HMS Implacable in the museum next to the Thames. Was that the National Maritime? A large model of Jervis Bay inside. Probably possibly National Maritime Museum. In car, was HMS Cavalier a good choice as an RN destroyer selected for preservation? You can't argue against one of the war emergency destroyers being preserved, but honestly, I think they preserved her because they'd run out, because they hadn't had any other options sometimes. I would have preferred to, there would have been at least 3 I'd have preserved, but they didn't preserve any of them. It was by the time they had the money and realized that we needed to do some preserving of history, they didn't have much left, so they went with what they had, the best of what they had available. Jeff Wheeler, frigates were cheaper in part because they had smaller crews. Was wartime build quality also an issue, like with the Ark Royal? It was on the battle class to an extent. It was to an extent on the battle class, or despite them taking the time they did to build them. Andy Falls, hence the post-war treasury casualties of Neptune and Minotaur classes. Instead, we got recycled Swifters and Blake classes of Minotaur. Yeah, we got all sorts of things fixed the treasury. Calvin Gasberg, do shipwrights name ships after living persons? Well, technically, there is an HMS Queen Elizabeth about. But technically, I think she's named for Queen Elizabeth I rather than II, so possibly not. Tim Coleman, when was the last Iron Daring decommissioned? 1970s, late 70s. But they'd only been commissioned. HMS Daring served 1952 to 1971. Diamond actually served till 1981, so she only went in November 1981, apparently. In which case, frankly, she was in reserve till 1981. Would have been quite useful to have around. A few months later, Duchess was given to the Australians in 64. Defender was till 1972. Dainty was around till 1971. Diana, 1969. They went quite young, these ships, really. And I'm just trying to look up number of dates of Decoy. I should try and remember stuff off the top of my head, but no, Decoy went in 1970. So why did Diamond hang around so long? Yeah. Diamond was given the role as harbour trading ship, lasted 10 years. She went through the whole 1970s, but she did keep her guns, apparently. So HMS Diamond, if she lasted another couple of years, this particular young lady could well have been in the Falklands War. Because as a harbour training ship, she'd have been able to be quite quickly crewed. Making it a Cedo could have been interesting, but crewed definitely. Dr. Clark, Iron ships at sea on escort duty enforcing blockades at Napoleon French World War II were important until that to an extent things it's a sea usage basically. Jeff Beeler, PNS Calabar was sunk off her home port of Karachi by the Indian Navy missile boat INS Narvik during the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. Yes, that's sad. See what? Yes, read story recently and saw pics of her last trip out. Very sad. Looking. 73 North. They had to fight to save Cavalier, and Mountbatten had a lot to do with that. I remember going on her as a kid while she was initially being restored. Yes, that is one of the good things Mountbatten did. Scene 1. Any darings mount any missiles post-war? Well, the Australians certainly did look in putting in missiles on them, and so did the British. And actually, the British actually did the work to fit Sea Slug onto one of the darings, definitely, possibly a second one, and then actually didn't go through with fitting them. But the plan was to replace the second torpedo station with Sea Slug. As you can see in this one, picture of HMS Delight, the second torpedo post has been replaced already, but it's been with accommodation and facilities for more radars, and to give her more power supply for those radars. Jeppy, the Darings had big crews and ugly funnels. Don't be cruel about that. Their funnels were fine. They're very pretty ships. And they have a lot of presence. Yes, the new candies were good, but they weren't ugly, Jeff. That's very rude of you to say that. Calling it dare. Don't worry, HMS Delight. You're delightful. Jeff, really? Vision, going through my new Daring class book, I was surprised of their short service life compared to the RAN ships and comparable USN post-war destroyers. It's short-term economics. It's people who know the value of a penny, who want to save a penny and sacrifice pounds. Jeff Beeler, HMS Bulwark was not able to be activated from reserve in 1982. No, she wasn't, but she was an aircraft carrier, which was used to be used as an LPH. She would have been a lot more complicated than a ship which was already being used as a harbour training ship and had some facilities still built in, because they'd done the minimal conversion. Very soon, RN in mid-World War II. Autoloading guns are coming soon. That means great new cruisers and ships. Treasury 1945. No money, no ships. Yep. Then later in post-war era, RN want missiles. Missiles are cool. Treasury, you can go have missiles but no guns. Hence the class go. Yeah, that is part of it. It's just some silly stuff. 73 North. The funnels are ugly. Paul Mountbatten, equals a lot of the Canadian infantry. Who cares? Stop it. Oh. Eric Acken, Darings 1949 were beautiful. More should be made of them. Thank you, Eric. I like you. Right then. So, this is what we started off with talking about, because we kept talking about what other ships were continuing. Well, this was the plan for the L class that Henderson drew up. And I'm just going to disappear for a second. And I'm going to extend this. To that. Right then. So, now, the joy that is these classes, you can see the difference in designs going down. And I want you to look at it, and I want you to look at specifically at the B class, at the battle class and the designs. Because if you look at the L class 44,000, and you look at what they were looking at, you'll notice there is a 4.5-inch gun there, which looks very similar to a Mark 6. And if you look at the 77,000, it looks very similar to a Daring class. This is what Henderson was drawing up after he built the Tribals and after he built the J class. His policy, his plan, was to alternate between super destroyers or large destroyers and destroyers which could be mass produced, i.e., ships which could provide wartime emergency destroyer designs, i.e., the J class, and ships which would provide fleet action vessels like the Tribals. Daring's open bridge reminds me of the movies about Graf Spee, Ajax and Achilles bridge specifically. Yeah. Just passing on contemporary opinion. Jeffrey, they gave them a funnel jump to which top humber. Don't get into it. Right. So now, as you can see, it's a lovely sort of scenario, and I can go further because we have the Tribal class destroyer and the L class 77,000. And if you look down at the Daring class design, you'll notice that it looks pretty darn similar. It's been canted back a bit, and a few bits have been changed with some understanding, with some development of time, but it's very similar to what Henderson was originally proposing for the L class, his preferred design for the L class. The L77,000, the L90. And this is my point about his legacy when we're talking about it. This is all the stuff which Henderson had already done for the Royal Navy. He provided, and him and Stanley Goodall had worked on providing the Royal Navy with a way to develop their destroyers. World War II happens, but because of the Daring class, because of the Tribal class, you can see the beginning and the end. And this is another reason why I do structure the book the way I do, and I'm looking at it from the way of the back pocket cruisers concept, because in a way, the building of the Daring class in 1949 to 1952, 53 is the last part of Henderson's Great Destroyer Revolution. It's from that point onwards, destroyers are confirmed as general purpose assets. Yes, there will be the Type 42s, and God help us, they happen. But there will also be the Type 45s, and before that, there will be the counties. And all these things will be far more general purpose assets than the destroyers before had been. And that's, sort of where the book sort of goes in some respects. Donna Fritz, why do we never get a destroyer with a triple or more if you... because, honestly, it would have been very complicated to install in the space. A triple turret is a very complicated thing. Best class of the three, I have to say the Darings are the most back pocket cruiser they get, but my favourites are the Tribals because of what they go through. The Tribals really do suffer for their status. They suffer for it. New IKB, I believe the phrase you're looking for is someone who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Those sort of, yeah. It is problematic. Tip Cohen, just imagine what a Daring would have looked like with the wheelhouse hump of the Battles and Tribals. Yeah. She sort of had it sort of grown up to an extent that she'd grown out of it almost in a way. So Jeff Beeler, so Daring is in part a free turret battle. Pretty much. Daring is in part a free turret battle. You have the battle class there. All right, they are built as they are because they have to have the between deck gun. Once you can have the upper deck mount, you can build, and you are able to build it with the freedom of peacetime to build at the length and at the beam you want. That's when you get the daring class. So that is why I say the battles are. This is why the battles are part of the continuation. It's not just tribals to darings. It's tribals, battles at a wartime build where all sorts of compromises are made because of the speed of getting them into service during war, and then they build the battles, which are the full development of post-treaty, post-World War II, no real restrictions, so they get to build what they want to build. Right, let's see what the questions are, so I don't miss them all. So I'm not looking away, I'm looking at the questions. Right. I'm interested, but wasn't it Tirpitz that said that Germans didn't understand the sea, hence destroyers with 6-inch guns that can't put to sea or run out of fuel? Yeah, it could well be Tirpitz. And as you can see, I use these 3 classes as the background of all my naval history work, so that is what is there. That's how important they are to me, in some respects. And they're cute. They are good-looking ships. J-class were not that much smaller than the tribals. No, they weren't. Henderson was trying to build as bigger destroyers as he could. He knew destroyers needed to be bigger if they wanted. He was thinking about fighting a global war, and it took several senior officers time to catch up with the fact that if you're fighting a global war, you need your destroyers to be able to go globally with you. You can't depend on having forward deployed flotillas. You have to have flotillas which can put up with the bashing of the sea to move with the capital ships. Airman, isn't there a D-class destroyer still around in South America? You could lobby to bring back. There is a D-class destroyer still in Australia, HMAS Vampire. I don't think there's anyone in South America. Tim Gong. Erican, gun arrangement for the Darings is 2 times 2 4.5-inch A and B position and 1 2 4.5 gun in Y position, able to rotate 360 to be a pretty strong arrangement. It seems to be a pretty strong arrangement. Yeah, and you must remember also, the Daring class guns were able to go up to 80 degrees and fire up to hit targets at 41,000 feet. And they did do it. It was also one of the other reasons why they didn't get missiles fitted. And it's an interesting thing. If they had Sea Slug fitted, they would probably have been still serving in the Falklands War. Because they didn't have it fitted, because it was felt their gun armor was sufficient that, frankly, Sea Slug wasn't enough advantage to justify the cost of fitting it, meant they weren't still serving in the Falklands War. Yes. Ben Grogan. Eric Hacken, to answer your penetration question, yes. Ben Grogan. Is this issue with the triple for them being 3 gun turrets, i.e. individual elevation versus twins with shared locked elevation? Yes. It's to an extent. If you have a triple turret, it's the mechanisms you need to maintain. It's also the mechanisms you need to feed ammunition to it, the store of the extra ammunition to keep it firing. All these things make a third gun a very complicated system. You can do it on a cruiser because you have a lot more space. You have to remember these ships are still only 3,600 tons, so they are still titchy by if you consider the HMS Belfast 10 to 12,000 tons by this point for full displacement. Paul, at Clark, if you were designing destroyers of Poland prior to World War II, knowing that they'd lose their bases after war commenced, what would your priorities be? Making them as close to British destroyers as possible, probably, and making them as potent as possible so that any ally would sign up with me. Nicasta, what about Nueva Esparta? I have no idea what Nueva Esparta is, but I will have a look it up because that one's managed to skip past me. Oh, the Spanish ones. Yeah. They're fairly cute, but they are not. They are built roughly the same time as the Darings, have roughly the same loadout, and are Vickers Armstrong built. So, yeah, they are probably adapted Darings, let's be honest, in some respects. Yeah, very, very much adapted Darings looking at their outfit. Had no idea about them. They'd managed to skip me past. But cute ships. Yay! Yeah, these are the upcoming. I'm more interested in questions, but these are the upcoming for the rest of July. Got the Patreon video on Monday. Woohoo! I'm looking forward to that. Patreon, was there something wrong with the Type 42 destroyers besides losses to Falklands and James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies? They are the Type 42 destroyers. The trouble is with them is they are. You could have done so much with the Type 42 design, but in many ways, the Type 42 design is designed around the Sea Dart missile system, and that is what they are. They are fighting destroyers, but they aren't able to do the presence mission or the diplomatic mission, which you need from a ship, which is going to be your major escort. The thing is, they're a crash build program built when the Royal Navy realized they're not going to get it Type 82s. Not really what it wanted. And Gary, could the batch-free Type 22s be seen as modern pocket cruisers? They could have been, definitely for their capabilities. And of course, was L70, L90 equipped with 4.5-inch guns? They were in Henderson's plans. Steve White, is French Fantique a move towards a presence ship or another mission? It's to an extent a move towards a presence mission, but you know, it's a move. Jeff Wheeler, what about daring class ships kerfuffle so that actual captains could be captains of them? It was fun. There was a few issues, but you know, they managed to make it. They did have captains. Kingsrook, how would you design a model equivalent to the tribal class? Start off with a good hull and work out what I needed for presence and what I needed for impact, and how much space I needed for a diplomacy. SMP, could you cover Admiral Walter Conan sometimes? At some point I could do. Donna Fritz, can they reload their guns when they are aimed at planes? They can maintain their fire at all positions. And the Darings could do it better than some of the later models could because they could have more manual influence. So if anything went wrong, they could manually do the stuff, and they would. I meant perhaps the Tribals and Darings should have all their armament forward like the Battles and Nelson. Nah, it'd been far too difficult to do that, and far less fun. Let's be honest. It's far more fun to be able to advance sternwards towards your enemy if anything happens to your front. Vision, was Sea Cat ever installed or considered for the Daring class? I think it was Sea Slug they were looking for rather than Sea Cat. Yeah. Oh, Tim Coleman. HMS Decoy, called Frere in the Peruvian Navy, was decommissioned in 2007. Cool. I wonder where she is. Probably gone by now, unfortunately. Yes, she would. With the ones with the Peruvian Navy did get Exocet missiles. Now I remember about it. I did remember reading about it. SMPI, would a modernized tribal platform be a good fit for a patrol and policing ship, especially in Coast Guard White? Well, if you kept still the gun armament, I suppose, but you know, nicest way, you would be building if you were building a modernized tribal, you wouldn't be building a tribal anymore. You would build it differently. Tribals are very much a ship of their period. They're beautiful ships of their period, but they wouldn't be what you'd build today for the same mission. You'd build something probably a bit bigger, and actually with a smaller crew, conversely. Vision. How did RN Seacat compare to USN's RIM T-24 Tartar missiles? We won't go there. CSAT Cat and Sea Slug weren't exactly the best missile systems known to mankind. They really weren't. They had a lot of little issues. A lot of issues. I know. I know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to quickly do the professional bit. This is where else you can find me. Well, hey! Twitter, Patreon, Glow Maritime History, and then I'm going to go back to this, and then I'm going to do that. Right then. And just leave it there. Tony Penfold, did you ever get to see a daring class in real life? I'm not that old. No, unfortunately, I haven't actually. I haven't managed to see HMS AS Vampire. I've managed to look at her pictures, but not gone to see her. And I haven't managed to see any of the Peruvian ones. Apparently, although I thought they were Chilean for some reason, but they're Peruvian. I did know some went to South America and some did get extra sets. I always thought they were Chilean and this weird, but no, they did get modernized. They did upgrade. They get extra sets. You know, you can do all sorts of things with them when you want to, and if you want to. That's the issue. It's having to want to do it. Right then, so can I find a picture of her? I'm trying to find a picture of the daring class with exocets, and it's not really coming through that well. Nope. Sadly enough, can't find them. That's nice. Bilge pumps up and fun. I'm glad it is, Stephanie. I'm very glad it's working. Calm gas mode. Seacat missile around 70 kilograms. Tardar missile around 600 kilograms. Not the same category. No. Vision. If I'd been RN, I would have gone short term with Tartarian while developing a domestic missile system family. Yeah, that sounds nice in theory. In practice, the trouble is you have the patriotism drum being beaten. And remember, the 1950s and 1960s are different to today. Today, Britain can accept, to an extent, that we can't build everything ourselves. In that period, we were very much not keen on the idea that we couldn't build everything ourselves. Shumak, what, in your opinion, is the worst example of willful but not malicious destruction of history? Dr. Clark. Sale of HMS, the scrapping of HMS Nubian. I'm seriously pissed off about that still. Dr. Clark, I see a campaign goal for Patreon. Any thoughts? I am that old. I got to see Diamond in Portsmouth before she was scrapped. Unfortunately, I was too young to appreciate her. Yeah, I am sort of jealous of that, Andy, actually. They were good ships. They were lovely ships. They really were. Peru seems to have a weird collection of interesting ships that could be preserved, like a Dutch light cruiser and a British daring class. If they are still around, I would quite happily go and take the daring off their hands and get it back to the UK. I'm sure I could have a reason for it to be stored somewhere. Any thoughts on modern ships such as HMS Ocean, which are built to lower spec, possibly more cost effective? HMS Ocean is a sensible design, Paul. She was a sensible design for what she needed. She was needed in LPH. And she was built at a time when the Royal Navy had 3 light aircraft carriers. So, and effectively, she gave us the guaranteed ability, because we had 4 ships roughly the same size. We could guarantee 1 ship available for the strike and 1 ship available for the amphibious task group for its helicopter ability, which is why you don't build the landing platform docks without any hangars. Well, at least that's an excuse given for deleting their hangars and flight handling facilities. Oh, Paul Johnson, that pair is still around, but due to be scrapped according to Wiki. I have to look into that. I will have to look into it and see if I can make a noise for someone. Start a fundraiser. There is a pic. There is a pic of her on the Wikipedia. I should probably have gone to the Wikipedia first, shouldn't I? That would have been sensible. Gone to the Wikipedia first. Back there, and let's see. There you go. There is a picture. Right then. You are moving. Sorry about this. As you can see, that is what a modernized daring looked like with exocets. She is carrying 8 exocets. And, she looks rather happy with it. But you can still see the base of daring. She's also got helicopter flight deck aft, which is the great thing for allowing helicopters to land and take off. And she seems to have lost her torpedo launcher here. But she's kept the guns because they were very good for weapon systems, even then. And very useful. She does look quite nice that way. And imagine the British could have modernized their darings just the same. So we could have ended up with a modernized darings for the joy that was the Falklands War. And please note that was said with sarcasm intended. Carl Gasman, a daring could get a C-ram, technically. And easily. Yeah, you could. A daring would be far more easy to upgrade than a tribal. They're bigger and they're more practical for it. In the nicest way, let's be honest, the daring is edging in there for size of certain modern ships. Turning 343. I would love to visit C802 De Ruyter. Yes. 801 De Ruyter. Although the naming convention has been... naming conventions do get weird. That's the whole fun of them. You know, these things do get weird, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Vision, how does Daring Class compare with US and Gearing Class and Forest Sherman destroyers? It's better in many, many respects. The Daring Class, let's put it this way, the Daring Class benefited from being the top of the line ships the Royal Navy was building at the time. They were built with the best of everything. They were built with a 45 year design life expectancy, and as you can see, some of them were in service for a very long, much longer time than that. Jeff Beeler, the Iranian battle was equipped with Sea-Cat then standard. Thank God for that poor ship. It got Sea standard. Emmett, is the Falklands War really a war? The Royal Navy was... Amen. That's a bit cruel to the British Army. The British Army are a lovely organisation and work very hard. And... well, they might not have evacuated them, but they did help them withdraw on occasion from certain areas. Turning 3434, the 7th Provincial was called the Reuter at one time, and the Reuter, the 7th Provincial. This happens. The example I often give is the Bittern class, where HMS Bittern is actually, I think, the second ship, because the first ship is changed to HMS Engadine, because she's going to be the yacht for the Admiralty. USN Farragut class, I'd go Farragut class, probably being the county class equivalents. Probably. The trouble is for the Royal Navy in this period is it's always working out what the Royal Navy needs and what they want. And I'm going to go at 8:30 because I have to have some tea because I haven't eaten so far today. And because I've been prepping this. As you saw, the slides have grown somewhat. So a fair number of slides, and I reorganized some things and made sure there was plenty of different stuff added in. So it wasn't just watching the same as I'd done in the previews before. Because I like these classes. I do sometimes mentally consider them one class because of the way they grow, because of the way they develop. They are really very, very beautiful ships, and you know, the Daring class get up to so much. The classic example I give you, and I can, I was planning on ending with this one anyway, but I need to find chapter 6 for it. Chapter 6 is technically the smallest chapter in my book, and the reason is the smallest chapter is because I was running out of words. This is a description given of the Darings in 1953. In your minute, and this is a response to Winston Churchill. In your minute of the 2nd of June, you asked for history of the class. The Darings were included in the 1944-45 new construction program as destroyers and were laid down between 1946 and 1950. The class totals 8 ships. 5 have recently joined the fleet. 1 is being placed direct in reserve because of naval manpower shortage, and the remaining 2 will join the fleet this autumn. These ships carry 6 4.5-inch guns with a high rate of fire and good accuracy against both aircraft and ships. Their torpedo armament, 10 torpedoes, gives them a good offensive striking power. In addition, they carry an ahead-throwing anti-submarine mortar Squid, and with their twin rudders, these ships, despite their size, have the small turning circle essential for anti-submarine operations. Darings are in fact the smallest hull, 3,500 tons, in which it is possible to fit the complicated armaments necessary for a maid-of-all work, and their offensive power far exceeds that of light cruisers of the past. In a future war, Daring class will be required for use in screen of British carrier striking forces, Atlantic Station, and for inclusion in light surface action forces when needed. B. At the spearhead of light forces to seek out enemy light forces, destroyers and below, in the Scandinavian area and Turkish waters. For such a role, their organisation as separate units working as light cruisers is more appropriate than a standard destroyer squadron organisation. To employ them so at present helps to offset the shortage of cruisers in commission, a shortage that cannot be remedied with while the manpower remains acute. That is what the Darings were. Take care, Stephen. Thank you. That's also silly, but Danny. Yeah, but I'm 30. I'm in my 30s. My mum tends to let me or expects me to remember to eat myself. Sometimes I forget because I get distracted by working. Cool. Paul Jones, side of topic. I watched the CBS documentary on Eisenhower's return to Normandy on D-Day plus 20 years. Think he crosses the channel in the daring. I think so too. I think I've seen the same documentary. What is tonight's delicious dinner meal? No idea. Maybe order Domino's. Richard Hughes, what subjects would you really like to discuss in the future? I think I'm going to be looking into a few more wars and a few operations. I've done a lot of class stuff, and I'm tempted to do some more operations stuff. But basically, I'm going to see where it goes. There's stuff I'm interested in. There's stuff that people on YouTube seem to be interested in, and I'm happy either way. If you guys want me to look at something, I'm happy to be pointed. If that's what you'd like me to do, because it's sort of, I enjoy the research. I enjoy the stuff. I know. Danny Freeman. Oh, I know, but a lot of the big names to the RN are now either SSBNs or Stone frigates. Every year I post on FB to congratulate my Dutch friends on the anniversary of the raid on the Midway. Carl Hammond, I was wondering what's the modern day equivalent of travel from any navy? In terms of a smaller ship which is aiming to do the present role of a larger ship's, another as Mooson class, I'd say the Royal Navy's appreciation of the Type 31s as well. Jeff Hill, don't ask any folks that were not in a war. Yeah. Ted Cohen, how about Black Swans? I think I've done something looking at, but I might do some more on the stuff. Right. It is 3 minutes 2, so I am going to finish with another quote about the lovely Darings. Because I don't think they get quoted about enough, and because they're cute. For the Royal Navy of the early 1950s, however, the new class represented the ultimate in warship design, comprising 8 powerful destroyers which were capable of carrying out duties normally assigned to light cruisers. Each of Daring class ships was in commission for less than 20 years, but during that time they saw the final transition from the big gun era to the age of the guided missile. During their early years of service, at least one ship of the class operated with the Navy's last big 15-inch gun battleship, HMS Vanguard, and in their closing years they operated with the Navy's first guided missile ships, the County-class destroyers. As their official logs, which are preserved in National Archives, proudly claim, they are officially classified not as destroyers, but as warships of the Daring class. What's interesting is that coincides rather neatly with if I can find the right quote. This is the trouble of having so many quotes in your introduction. Tribals will be used to supplement cruisers in reconnaissance and screening duties, including screening aircraft carriers and as support for destroyers in opening the way for torpedo attack. It was also used for shadowing at night and supplement the anti-aircraft fire of battleships, and one tribal forming stern each battleship as its attack. In other words, the Royal Navy started and ended this period with ships filling in for cruisers, with destroyers filling in for cruisers, because they couldn't build enough cruisers to meet that demand, to meet their need. And that's what these ships were. These classes were built to fill the roles of other ships, and they did it quite well. Anyway, take care. Thank you very much. And I'm going to say thank you to all my subscribers. Thank you to the 70 people who stayed here the whole way through. Thank you to everyone who's watched, who's liked, who's shared, who's super chats, all the other stuff. Thank you. And as Jeff Beeler has kindly pointed out, the Darings were the Easter swept aside the Easter Suez ships, swept out with Eagle and Victorious. Yeah. Take care, Kings Rook. Take care, everyone. Have a nice evening. Thank you to everyone, and thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for everything. And I'll be on Patreon in a bit to chat about Mysteries of the Deep, which is on tonight at 9 o'clock. Take care. Danny Freeman spent a good part of the talk looking for a plushy destroyer. Yeah, that's always a good thing. Take care. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hope you get your plushy destroyer. Bye. Just thought I'd leave you with a nice big picture of all three. Take care and thank you.